Jack Turner was an ordinary guy just trying to get by. He wasn't rich, famous, or even particularly lucky. He worked as a janitor in a small town, spending his days cleaning up messes in a local shopping mall. His life was quiet and uneventful. If someone had asked Jack to describe his future, he would have said it was nothing more than a collection of ordinary days. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat. That was until one fateful day when everything changed. It started with an envelope. Not just any envelope, but a large, shiny one that looked way too important for someone like Jack. The letter was addressed to him in bold, elegant writing, and the seal on the back was like nothing he had ever seen before. It looked almost alien. The words on the envelope read, "To the one who will inherit the legacy of King Zorak." Jack didn't even know who King Zorak was, but the strange envelope definitely caught his attention. With a mix of confusion and curiosity, Jack opened it. Inside, he found a letter written in a language that seemed to have a strange, almost magical feel to it. But what really made Jack's eyes widen was the message at the bottom, which explained everything. The letter was from a group called the Galactic Council, and it claimed that Jack had just inherited a vast fortune, including a starship and the title of Lord over an entire alien planet. Jack stared at the letter in disbelief. The idea that a normal guy like him could be handed something so big was almost impossible to imagine. But it wasn't just the fortune or the title that was strange. The letter explained that Jack was now the legal heir of a deceased alien king named Zorak the Terrible. The king had ruled a distant planet far away in another galaxy, and since Zorak didn't have any human family, Jack, a complete stranger to him, was the one chosen to inherit his kingdom. The letter said that there was no mistake and that Jack's inheritance was real. He was to leave his life behind and take up his new role as lord of this alien world. At first, Jack thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe it was a prank from one of his friends or a scam. After all, who would believe something as outrageous as inheriting an alien kingdom? But as he kept reading, Jack realized this wasn't some fake letter. There were details about him. His life, his job, and even his family. Things no one could have known unless they were real. The letter even came with a strange, glowing symbol on the back, which seemed to pulse with energy. Jack stared at it for a moment, feeling a chill run down his spine. This didn't feel like a joke at all. This was real. Still unsure of what to do, Jack set the letter down on his kitchen table and rubbed his eyes. It was hard to wrap his mind around what was happening. Was he really supposed to leave everything behind? His job? His home? His friends? The letter gave him no choice but to act. It said that Jack's presence was required immediately. Not only was he the new lord of this faraway planet, but he was also expected to meet the Galactic Council, a group of powerful beings who ruled over countless planets and civilizations. Jack couldn't just ignore it. If this was real, then this was an opportunity of a lifetime. But what did it all mean? What was expected of him? How could someone like him, a janitor with no experience in ruling anything, be fit to take on such an enormous responsibility? Without wasting any more time, Jack packed a small bag and made his way to the location mentioned in the letter. He wasn't sure where it was or how he would get there, but he had no choice but to follow the instructions. The letter had said a transport would be waiting for him, and sure enough, when Jack reached the specified location, he found a large spaceship waiting in a field behind a nearby forest. It looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie, with sleek, shiny surfaces and a glowing light at its center. The door to the spaceship opened automatically and Jack stepped inside. As he did, the door shut behind him, and the ship slowly began to rise into the air. Jack felt a wave of excitement mixed with nervousness. The next few moments were a blur as he hurtled through the sky and then into the stars. He could hardly believe what was happening. One moment he was cleaning floors in a mall and the next he was traveling through space. When the ship finally landed, Jack found himself on a strange planet with colorful skies and unfamiliar landscapes. It looked like something out of a dream. A place where nothing was quite like Earth. The air smelled different and the ground beneath his feet felt soft, almost springy. Everything was so alien, and yet It was real. Jack had to pinch himself just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. He was taken to a large, ornate building that looked like a palace, and there, in a grand hall, was the Galactic Council. Jack had no idea what to expect, but when he saw them, he froze. The council wasn't made up of ordinary beings. They were all different species from across the galaxy, each one more bizarre and otherworldly than the next. Some were tall and thin, others short and wide. Some had multiple arms, others had glowing eyes, and one even had tentacles that seemed to float around it as though it was underwater. But amidst all the strange faces, Jack couldn't help but notice one thing. They were all staring at him with something that looked like amusement. It was clear from their expressions that they found his presence here funny. As Jack stood in front of them, he began to feel the weight of their eyes on him. The council members, despite being incredibly powerful, began to laugh. Not just a little chuckle, but full-blown laughter. It was as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A human? Inheriting an entire alien kingdom? They laughed at Jack's confused expression and awkward stance. It was almost as though they didn't take him seriously at all. Jack stood there, unsure of what to do or say. He had no experience with anything like this, and it was clear that the council didn't think much of him. But just as their laughter filled the room, Jack's eyes were drawn to a shadowy figure sitting off to the side, a figure that would change everything. After the shocking revelation that Jack Turner had inherited an alien kingdom, he was taken to the planet where he was now supposed to rule. But even more surprising than the galaxy full of alien beings that had laughed at him was the alien princess he now had to take care of in Zora. The problem wasn't that she was a princess. It wasn't even that she came from a powerful royal bloodline. No, the real issue was Zora's appearance, which was unlike anything Jack had ever seen before. When Jack first heard the news about Zora, he didn't know what to expect. He had been told that the princess was the daughter of King Zorak, the alien king whose fortune he had inherited. But the way the Galactic Council spoke about her made it clear that Zora was more of a problem than a royal asset. They described her as hideous, terrifying, and monstrous. She was not just an alien princess. She was a being who had caused fear across galaxies because of her grotesque form. Jack thought, how bad could she really be? But when he met her in person, he understood why the council had warned him. Zora stood before Jack, her presence almost intimidating. At first glance, Jack had trouble figuring out what he was looking at. She was tall, but her body was not like a human's. Her skin was a strange shade of dark purple, almost like bruises that never healed. Her face had sharp, jagged edges, with eyes that glowed an eerie yellow. Her hair was a mass of writhing, tendrils that moved as if alive, and her mouth was filled with rows of sharp teeth that seemed to gleam in the dim light of the palace. Despite her monstrous appearance, Zora didn't look angry. She looked sad. There was a deep sorrow in her glowing eyes, something that spoke volumes to Jack even before she said a word. She wasn't the fierce, terrifying monster that the Galactic Council made her out to be. She seemed to be more like a creature trapped in a body that everyone feared. "Lord Jack Turner," she said, her voice low and raspy. "It's an honor to meet you, I guess." Jack didn't know how to respond. He had been prepared for something ugly, but he wasn't prepared for this. Zora's tone wasn't one of pride or power. It was filled with uncertainty, as if she didn't believe she deserved any of the things that had been handed to her, including her royal status and the fact that Jack was now responsible for her. He blinked, still processing what he was seeing. Hi," Jack said awkwardly. "You're Zora, right?" She nodded, her tendrils twitching. "Yes, I am Zora, daughter of King Zorak, the one you inherited, everything from." As Jack stood there unsure of what to do, he noticed that Zora wasn't making any effort to look proud. She wasn't walking tall like a ruler. Instead, she kept her head down as if she was trying to shrink into herself, hide from the world. The contrast between her alien form and her posture was striking. She looked like a broken being, someone who had been through far more than anyone could imagine. Zora's reputation as a monster wasn't just about how she looked. It was also about her father, King Zorak. Zorak had been a ruler known for his cruelty. He had terrorized entire star systems, crushed rebellions, and used his power to make others fear him. Zora had been raised in that environment, and it seemed that the cruelty of her father had been passed down to her, but not in the way most people would think. The truth was, Zora had never wanted to rule with fear. She had always been a quiet, introspective person, deeply affected by the violence her father had inflicted on others. But being his daughter meant that everyone expected her to act the same way, to be as terrifying as he had been. She had inherited his power, yes, but she had never inherited his desire for domination. Jack could see all of this now, even in her sadness. He could see that Zora wasn't the monster the galaxy thought she was. She had been forced into a role she didn't want, and her looks only made it worse. Everywhere she went, people treated her like a monster, and she had learned to live with that by becoming cold and distant. But Jack wasn't like the rest of the galaxy. He wasn't intimidated by her appearance. He saw past the jagged skin, the glowing eyes, and the sharp teeth. He saw someone who had been abandoned, someone who had been told her whole life that she was nothing but a weapon to be feared. And he wasn't sure if he could change anything, but he wasn't going to stand by and let her be treated like a villain any longer. Over the next few days, Jack spent more time with Zora. He found himself drawn to her, even though everyone around him seemed to think she was a lost cause. The palace was a lonely place, and Zora rarely left her chambers. She stayed hidden away from the eyes of the other alien leaders who would occasionally visit, only to mock her in private. Zora wasn't just sad, she was bitter. And who could blame her? She had been treated like a weapon her entire life. The idea of her inheriting a kingdom should have been an opportunity. But to Zora, it felt like a cruel joke. She had never wanted any of this. She had no desire to rule a planet or lead armies. She just wanted to be left alone, to live her life without fear. But Jack refused to let her hide. He made it his mission to learn more about her, to understand her. Slowly, he began to see glimpses of who Zora really was, a being of great intelligence, empathy, and strength. Despite her tough exterior, Zora had a deep love for the people she had never been able to protect. She wasn't a monster. She was just someone who had been forced into a world that didn't understand her, a world that judged her by her appearance. One afternoon, as Jack sat in the royal gardens with Zora, he finally asked her a question he had been wondering about since the moment they met. "Why didn't you try to escape?" he asked. "You could have left this place, right? You could have gone anywhere, done anything." Zora looked up at him, her glowing yellow eyes softer than usual. She let out a sigh, and for the first time, Jack saw a small smile tug at the corner of her lips. It wasn't a big smile, just a tiny one, but it was enough to make Jack realize how much he had misjudged her. "I couldn't leave," she said quietly. "My father made sure of that. Even if I wanted to escape, I would always be hunted, and I didn't want to leave the kingdom in chaos. I was born to take over one day, but I didn't want to rule. I didn't want any of it. I just wanted to be free." Jack listened carefully, feeling a deep sympathy for her. He realized that the galaxy's laughter had never been about her appearance. It was about her father's legacy, about the fear he had created. And Zora, despite everything, was stuck with that legacy, whether she wanted it or not. "I understand," Jack said softly, "but you don't have to do this alone. I'll help you. We can figure this out together." Zora's eyes widened slightly. For a moment, it looked like she was about to say something, but then she stopped herself. She shook her head and let out a small laugh. "You don't even know what you're getting yourself into. This galaxy isn't kind to anyone, let alone a human who has no idea what they're doing." Jack smiled. "Maybe not, but I'm not leaving you to face this on your own." Zora's gaze softened even more, and for the first time, Jack saw something in her that resembled hope. Jack Turner's new life as the lord of an alien planet was nothing like he had imagined. He had thought that inheriting a kingdom would mean living in luxury, managing vast resources, and enjoying power. But instead he found himself trying to understand the strange and terrifying world of intergalactic politics, where appearances were everything, and power meant respect. And that was before the Galactic Council, a powerful assembly of beings from all over the universe, decided to meet him face to face. The first time Jack stood before the Galactic Council, he felt a mix of excitement and dread. The Council was not just a group of ordinary politicians. It was made up of some of the most powerful and influential beings in the universe. Each member was a representative of a different galaxy, with their own unique species, cultures, and ambitions. Some were tall and thin, others short and bulky. Some had tentacles, while others had multiple eyes or wings. The diversity of the council was astonishing, and it was clear that Jack was the only human in the room. But what really caught Jack off guard was the way they reacted to him. They didn't seem impressed. In fact, they seemed to find the whole situation laughable. "You must be the new lord of Zorak's kingdom," said one of the council members, a tall, thin creature with glowing blue skin and 6 arms. He had a voice that was cold and mocking. How amusing, a human inheriting such power. The others in the room chuckled. Jack could feel his face turn red as they continued to laugh, clearly amused by the idea of a mere human holding such a position of authority. It was as though they didn't take him seriously at all. Zora, who had accompanied Jack to the meeting, stood quietly beside him, her tendrils twitching nervously. Jack could sense the discomfort in her, as if she too was used to being the subject of ridicule. He could almost feel the weight of the council's laughter pressing down on her. One of the other council members, a small alien with 4 eyes and the ability to shift shapes, leaned forward and sneered at Jack. "You're just a janitor, aren't you? A human with no experience in ruling anything. What makes you think you can handle the responsibility of governing an entire planet?" Jack wanted to protest, to explain that he hadn't asked for any of this, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say to defend himself? He was just a regular guy who had somehow found himself in the middle of a galactic mess. He didn't belong here. He didn't know how to rule a planet or manage the complicated politics of the galaxy. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let these beings see him as weak. Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped forward. "I may not have experience in ruling a planet," he said, his voice shaky at first, but growing steadier with each word. "But I'm not here to prove myself to you. I'm here because this is what the law requires. I've inherited this kingdom and I'll do my best to govern it, whether you like it or not." The room fell silent. For a moment no one spoke. Jack's words hung in the air, and he could see the surprise on the faces of the council members. They weren't used to being spoken to like that, especially by someone they saw as an inferior human. Finally, the creature with 6 arms smirked. "Very well, if you think you can handle it, Lord Turner," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let's not forget that you have something far more important to deal with than your so-called kingdom." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" The creature's smirk deepened. "You see, Lord Turner," he continued, "there's a little matter of your ward, Princess Zora. As you may have noticed, she's not exactly, well, presentable, is she?" Zora's face twisted into an expression of disgust. Jack felt her tension radiate beside him. He could see the hurt in her eyes as the council continued to mock her. It was clear that this wasn't the first time they had made fun of her appearance. The council members didn't care that Zora was a person with feelings. All they saw was her monstrous appearance and the legacy of her father, King Zorak. And that made her an object of ridicule. One of the other council members, a hulking creature with thick red skin and a voice like a growl, joined in. "A galactic ruler must inspire fear and respect, but how can anyone take a kingdom seriously when its princess looks like she belongs in the trash heap?" His laughter echoed through the chamber, and Jack could see that Zora was visibly shrinking in on herself. Her tendrils hung limp, her eyes glowing less brightly, as if the ridicule was draining her energy. Jack's stomach churned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't just mockery, it was cruelty. Zora wasn't just a joke to them, she was a target. a target they couldn't resist taking shots at. The council members didn't seem to care that Jack was uncomfortable. They had made their point, and now they were waiting for him to respond. But what could Jack say? How could he defend Zora, who had been treated like this her whole life? Enough, Jack finally shouted, his voice cutting through the laughter. I don't care what you think of me or my appearance, but I will not stand by and let you talk about Zora like that. The room went silent again, and Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had raised his voice, something he rarely did, but he wasn't going to let these powerful beings treat Zora like she was nothing. Zora looked at Jack in surprise. Her tendrils had stopped twitching, and she stood a little taller, though the sadness in her eyes remained. She hadn't expected him to defend her, not like this. You all think you can tear people down with your words, Jack continued, his voice steadier now. But let me tell you something. Zora is more than her appearance. She's more than her father's legacy. She's a person, just like you and me. And I won't let you bully her, not on my watch. For the first time, Jack felt a surge of confidence. He was standing up for someone who needed it, someone who had been silenced for too long. It wasn't just about ruling the planet anymore. It was about doing the right thing. And if he had to face down the entire Galactic Council to do it, then so be it. The room was quiet for what seemed like forever. The council members exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable, others still holding on to their smugness. Finally, the six-armed creature spoke again, but his tone was less mocking now. Well, Lord Turner, he said, his voice softer, but still dripping with condescension. It seems you have a bit more fire in you than we thought. But remember, this means you are in our world now. You may think you can change things, but the galaxy doesn't work on idealism. It works on power. Jack stood tall, his eyes never leaving the creature. Power isn't everything. If that's how you see things, then maybe you're the ones who don't understand how the galaxy works. The council fell silent once again. There was a strange tension in the air, but Jack didn't care. He had made his point, and he wasn't backing down. Finally, the council members seemed to lose interest. They waved him off, dismissing him as if his words didn't matter. But Jack wasn't bothered. He had come to realize that the Galactic Council wasn't the most important thing. It was the people he was responsible for. Zora, the people of the planet, and himself. They were the ones who mattered. As Jack and Zora left the council chamber, Zora spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Thank you, she said quietly. I didn't expect that. Jack smiled at her, his heart swelling with pride. You deserve more than that, he said. You deserve to be treated with respect. And I'm going to make sure you get it. Zora's eyes glowed a little brighter, and Jack knew that he had made a difference. Maybe not to the council, but to her. After the shocking encounter with the Galactic Council, Jack Turner and Zora returned to their new home, the grand palace that had once belonged to her father, King Zorak. The moment they stepped through the towering doors, Jack felt the weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders. He had to face not only the council's mockery, but also the growing challenges of being an unexpected ruler in a world where nothing was as it seemed. Zora, though still recovering from the harsh words of the council, seemed a little more relaxed now. Her eyes, which had glowed dimly in the council chamber, were now slightly brighter. She had a quiet strength about her that Jack hadn't noticed before, a resilience he could only admire. Thanks for standing up for me, Zora said as they walked down a long hallway in the palace. Her tendrils swayed with a kind of grace Jack hadn't seen before, and her voice carried a note of gratitude he hadn't expected. Jack glanced over at her, trying to figure out what to say. You don't have to thank me. I couldn't just stand there and let them talk like that about you. Nobody deserves that kind of treatment, especially not you. Zora gave him a faint smile, one that was brief but genuine. She wasn't used to being smiled at, let alone being defended. Jack could see that the council's cruelty had left deep scars, and those scars weren't just on her physical appearance. The emotional toll was something that even Jack, with his best intentions, couldn't easily heal. But he was determined to try. As they continued to walk through the palace, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it felt more like an understanding that needed no words. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on, something deeper than just the council's mockery or the inheritance of a kingdom he never asked for. There was a rebellion brewing, and it wasn't just the political kind. The rebellion wasn't about Jack or Zora. It was about the very structure of the galaxy itself. The growing discontent weeks passed since the council meeting, and Jack tried to settle into his new role. But he quickly learned that ruling a planet wasn't about making decisions from a comfortable throne in a palace. It was about balancing a dozen different factions, each with their own agenda. He had to meet with advisors, oversee trade agreements, manage conflicts between various species, and, most troubling of all, deal with Zora's increasing anxiety. Despite Jack's efforts to reassure her, Zora wasn't coping well. She wasn't used to leadership, and she certainly wasn't used to being in the public eye. She had grown up in a palace, but it had always been under the shadow of her father's cruel rule. Now she was expected to step into his shoes, a task that felt impossible. But there was more to it than that. Zora had inherited not only her father's throne but his enemies as well. King Zorak's reign had been marked by conquest, violence, and fear. Many people had sided with him out of fear, not loyalty, and now that he was gone, those alliances were crumbling. Zora was being forced to carry the weight of her father's reputation, a reputation that was darker than any shadow. Jack could see the toll it was taking on her. She spent long hours in her chambers, rarely leaving except for meetings that she dreaded. Her appearance, which had once been the source of ridicule, was now a symbol of the old regime, and it made her feel more isolated than ever. The laughter of the council still echoed in her ears, and Jack knew that the pressure was starting to break her. One evening, after a long day of meetings and paperwork, Jack found Zora in the palace garden, sitting on a stone bench near a fountain. The stars above twinkled brightly, and the soft glow from her skin reflected in the water, creating a surreal, almost ethereal atmosphere. But Zora didn't look ethereal. She looked tired, worn out, and lonely. "Hey," Jack said softly as he approached. "You okay?" Zora didn't look up immediately. She simply stared at the water, her tendrils trailing lazily through the air. "Do you know what it's like to have the entire universe laugh at you?" she asked, her voice quiet and almost bitter. "To know that no matter what you do, they will always see you as the daughter of a tyrant?" Jack sat beside her, unsure of how to respond. He had never experienced anything like what she was going through, but he could feel the weight of her words. He knew she wasn't asking for sympathy, she just needed someone to listen. "I can't even imagine," he said after a pause. "But I do know this. You're not your father. And I'm not going to let anyone treat you like you are." Zora let out a soft, almost inaudible laugh. "That's easy for you to say. You didn't grow up in a palace, surrounded by people who only pretend to respect you because of who your father was." Jack glanced at her, his heart heavy. "I know I can't undo your past, but maybe we can start something new. Together. We can rebuild your kingdom on your terms, not his." Zora turned to him, her glowing eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him uneasy. For the first time, she didn't seem like a victim. She seemed like someone who was beginning to think about what her future could hold. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low. "The council won't let me rebuild anything. They'll fight me every step of the way. They want me to be a puppet, just like my father was. And they want you out of the picture too." Jack frowned. "What are you talking about?" Zora stood up, her tendrils curling in agitation. "There's more going on here than just the council's mockery. There's a rebellion growing in the shadows, and they're targeting us, targeting me, because they know that if I try to rule, I'll be just another puppet. They won't allow it." Jack felt his stomach drop. "Who's behind it?" Zora hesitated before speaking, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him with the information. But after a moment, she spoke. "The factions loyal to my father. They've been hiding, in the corners of the galaxy, waiting for the right moment to strike. They want the throne for themselves. They want to control the galaxy like Zorak did. But they'll have to go through me first." Jack stood up, his eyes widening with realization. And me, right? Zora nodded. Yes. They want to remove both of us, and if we're not careful, they'll succeed. Preparing for the unknown. Now that they knew the truth, Jack and Zora couldn't afford to ignore the growing rebellion. They had to prepare for what was coming, and that meant making difficult decisions. The first step was to build an alliance, not just with the Galactic Council, but with anyone who could help protect them. But the rebellion wasn't just an external threat. It was growing inside the palace walls, too. Zora's closest advisors, many of whom had served her father, were starting to question her ability to rule. Some of them were even conspiring against her, hoping to replace her with someone they could manipulate. For the first time since inheriting the kingdom, Jack realized just how dangerous the game of power truly was. It wasn't about ruling fairly or justly. It was about survival. Jack and Zora spent the next few weeks working in secret. They began gathering information, meeting with trusted allies, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the factions loyal to her father. They couldn't afford to let anyone know what they were planning. Every move they made had to be calculated. And then, one night, a messenger arrived. "Lord Turner, Princess Zora," the messenger said, bowing deeply. "We've intercepted a transmission. The rebellion is planning to strike tomorrow night. They're gathering their forces, and they intend to take control of the palace." Jack and Zora exchanged grim looks. The time had come. They had no choice but to act, and fast. The air in the palace was thick with tension. Jack and Zora knew that the rebellion was no longer just a whisper in the shadows. It was a full-scale threat, and it was coming for them. The message from the messenger had been clear. The factions, loyal to Zora's father, were planning to strike tomorrow night. It was now or never. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Jack paced back and forth in his private chambers, trying to think of a plan. Zora stood by the window, her eyes scanning the stars. The weight of what was about to happen seemed to hang over them both, but there was no turning back. They had no choice but to face this head-on. "I never imagined it would come to this," Jack muttered, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "I thought when I became lord of this place that maybe I could do some good. Maybe I could change things, but now—" Zora turned away from the window, her glowing eyes focused on him. "You've already changed things," she said softly. "By standing up for me, by believing in me when no one else did. That's more than I could have asked for." Jack glanced at her, his heart swelling with admiration. Despite everything she had been through, the ridicule, the pressure, the constant reminders of her father's legacy, Zora had kept going. She was stronger than he had ever given her credit for, and now they were in this together. If they were going to win this battle, they would have to rely on each other. "What's the plan?" Jack asked, his voice firm despite the uncertainty. In his mind, Zora's expression hardened. "We can't trust anyone inside the palace anymore. There are too many who are still loyal to my father's regime. We'll need to strike first. I have a few allies left, but it's not enough to take on the rebellion. We need more soldiers, more support. I'll contact my allies and arrange for backup." Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What about the Galactic Council?" he asked. "Can they help us?" Zora shook her head. "The Council doesn't care about me. They'll let the rebellion play out however it does. They'll only get involved if they see a clear winner. We're on our own." Jack felt a pang of frustration. The Galactic Council, who had laughed at them only weeks ago, had made it clear they had no intention of offering any real help. If anything, they were just waiting to see who would come out on top. It was up to Jack and Zora to survive and take back control. But how? Rallying the forces that night, after hours of strategizing, Zora made contact with the few remaining allies who still had faith in her leadership. These were people who had served under her father's rule, but had never agreed with his methods. They were quietly waiting for an opportunity to overthrow the tyrannical regime, and now it seemed that time had come. Through encrypted channels, Zora and Jack arranged for a meeting in one of the secret rooms hidden beneath the palace. It was a place few knew about, and even fewer dared to enter. As the night grew darker, the room filled with a mix of human and alien faces. Some of them looked uneasy, others determined, but all of them shared the same goal: to stop the rebellion before it could tear the planet apart. The first to speak was Kale, a former advisor who had served as a military strategist under King Zorak. His race was known for its sharp minds and quick reflexes, and his loyalty to Zora had been unshakable. Even when most of the others had turned their backs on her, he stood at the front of the room, a tall, imposing figure who commanded attention. "We have no time to waste," Kale said, his voice low and steady. "The rebels will attack tomorrow night. We need to be ready. Zora, Lord Turner, how many soldiers can you count on?" Zora glanced around the room at the gathered faces. "We have a few hundred loyalists left. Maybe more if we can recruit some of the local forces, but we'll be outnumbered." "Outnumbered?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Zora, your father's forces were vast. You have more supporters than you think. You just need to ask the right people." Zora shook her head. "They'll never rally to my side. They still see me as my father's daughter." "That's where you're wrong," Jack spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're not your father. You're Zora, and people will fight for you if you show them you can lead. We have to give them a reason to believe in you." Zora looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt, but Jack could see the flicker of hope in her expression. She wasn't convinced, but she was willing to listen. Kale nodded. "Jack's right. We need to show them what they're fighting for. A chance at a new beginning, not just for the galaxy, but for this planet." With that, they laid out a plan. It wasn't perfect, and there were many unknowns, but it was all they had. They would divide their forces into smaller groups, each tasked with taking out key rebel strongholds before the main assault. Zora would lead one group, while Jack would lead another. They would meet at the central palace, where the final battle would take place. The rest of the night was spent preparing for the worst. Weapons were checked, communications were set up, and alliances were solidified. Jack, who had never been a soldier, found himself thrust into a role he had never imagined. He would lead people into battle. He would fight to protect Zora and, in turn, protect the future of the galaxy. The night of the battle. The night finally arrived, and the palace was shrouded in an eerie quiet. Jack stood at the front of his group, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about survival. This was about protecting everything Zora had fought for, everything they had worked toward. Zora was with her group, poised and determined, ready to face whatever came. Despite her uncertainty, she carried herself like a true leader, the strength she had been hiding for so long finally emerging. Jack could see it in her eyes. She was ready. As the battle began, the palace erupted in chaos. The rebel forces, hundreds strong, stormed the gates, their weapons glowing in the dark. But they were met with fierce resistance. Zora's loyalists, once hesitant, fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose. Jack's group made its way through the palace corridors, taking down rebels one by one. There was no time for hesitation. Each turn they took brought them closer to the heart of the palace, where the final confrontation would occur. Jack could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was real. This was the fight for Zora's future. Meanwhile, Zora's group was facing its own struggles. The rebels had anticipated this move and were ready to fight back just as fiercely. Zora's forces had been forced into a fierce standoff, the tension rising with each passing second. Then, as Jack rounded a corner, he saw her, Zora, standing face to face with the leader of the rebellion. His heart stopped for a moment. The man was tall, with glowing red eyes and a cruel sneer on his face. He was the one who had been orchestrating the rebellion from the shadows. The one who had been manipulating those who had once supported her father. "You're too late, Princess," the rebel leader said, his voice dripping with malice. "This planet is ours now. You're nothing but a relic." Zora stepped forward, her tendrils swaying with determination. "No, you're wrong. This planet is mine, and I will protect it." The two clashed, their battle more than just a fight for control. It was a battle for freedom, for a chance at redemption. And as Jack watched from the doorway, he knew that this was the moment that would determine everything. The turning point. The fight raged on, But as the rebel leader's smug smile faltered, Jack knew they were winning. Zora's leadership had turned the tide, and with her allies standing strong beside her, the rebellion was beginning to crumble. The battle was far from over, but Jack was beginning to believe that they could actually win. Zora's final strike was swift and powerful. With a roar, she knocked the rebel leader to the ground, his weapon slipping from his hand. She stood over him, her glowing eyes filled with fire and defiance. "You're finished," she said. The rebellion was over, a new beginning. In the aftermath of the battle, the palace was still and quiet. The rebel forces had been defeated, their leader captured. Zora's throne was secure once more, and this time it was hers, not as a puppet of her father's regime, but as a leader in her own right. Jack stood by her side, watching the sunrise. From the balcony of the palace, the battle had been fierce, but they had survived, and now they could begin to rebuild. Zora turned to him, her eyes soft. "We did it," Jack smiled. "Together." And in that moment, both of them knew that the future was theirs to shape. The galaxy was vast and uncertain, but for the first time Zora was ready to face it as its true ruler, not the daughter of a tyrant, but the queen she was always meant to be.